Welcome to the Urban Engagement Podcast. Let's get started. Here's your host, Reverend Gerald Britt.
Welcome to the Urban Engagement Podcast, a production of City Square's External Affairs Department. I'm your host, Reverend Gerald Britt Jr., Vice President of External Affairs, and today we have one of City Square's most interesting staff person. She's kind of a City Square lifer. We've got J.R. Newton with us, and she is our community health nurse for our Community Health Services Clinic. J.R. is a graduate of Texas Tech University. She is in Lubbock, Texas. She's got a BA in social welfare. She's got a diploma from the Methodist Hospital School of Nursing. She's a registered nurse. In 2005, she accepted her call to the ministry, and following that, she obtained her master's degree in divinity from Bright School of Divinity at TCU in Fort Worth, and she's a trained chaplain for the Methodist Hospital Systems of Dallas, and then she's a member of St. Paul UMC, where Richard Butler is the pastor. So that's a rather varied and a diverse academic career on top of being an academician in that regard. She's also one of three authors we have at City Square. Larry James has written 2 books, I've written one, and JR has written another one, Healing Voices, which came out, was it last year? 2016. And it's an extremely interesting book. We're going to talk some about that today. But I'm delighted to have you with us, JR, and thank you for consenting to do this.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, JR, you've lived a rather accomplished life, and to say that at the same time to say, in the words of the poet, life for you ain't been no crystal stair. It's been quite a journey. And you chronicle much of that journey in your book, Healing Voices. So let's get started there. Why did you write the book?
I wrote the book out of concern that women that had endured domestic violence were not being heard. I felt like they needed a safe place to be able to tell their stories and judgment-free. And I had been through domestic violence situation, so I totally understood what it was like. I met a young lady at a Bible study I was doing when I was at Central Dallas Church, matter of fact. Mm-hmm. And we did a Bible study, and at that Bible study, that Saturday night was kind of like a waiting to exhale thing. The Holy Spirit broke loose. I'd never seen it like that. Mm-hmm. And just women were crying, and it was a lot of breakthrough that evening. So that next Sunday morning, a young lady came to me. I knew her, but I didn't know her that well. And she came to me and she just said, "Now I understand why I have had years of drug addiction." She said, because of the abuse that I went through. And she started telling me all of this horrible stuff that had happened. My hair just stood up on my arms. I was like, "You have got to tell somebody this." She said, "Well, I can't write very well." I said, and out of my mouth, it was definitely not me. It was the Holy Spirit that said, I said, "Well, if you'll tell me, I'll write it down." And so she came to me like every week for like 4 weeks, and man, matter of fact, it's that first story that's in the book. And
it's a very riveting story as well. And we want to talk about that because the drug addiction, alcoholism, poverty, all of that is or can be an outgrowth of experiences of domestic violence. Yes. Long-term experiences of domestic violence. But let's get real basic with this. What is domestic violence?
Domestic violence is, and it doesn't have to just be females, it could be male and female victims that have experienced, you can be financially abused where someone is holding your finances. You can be emotionally abused where you are browbeaten, so to speak. You're gaslighted, make it seemed that everything is your fault when it's not. You can be physically abused. That means you can be hit, punched, kicked, choked, and choking is a felony because it does impede airway and blood supply to the head. So it is now considered a felony when you choke someone. You can be just shamed. Wherever you go, your partner is shaming you. Anytime you feel diminished or demeaned, all of those are forms of abuse.
So it's not just a matter of one partner hitting another, or one partner even doing one particular act. It can be a range of things. Usually
they come in clusters, especially rape, incest. All of those are domestic abuse. A lot of times, if you have one dysfunction, you have several dysfunctions with it.
So there is in the book you kind of break through some of the stereotypes of domestic violence. They go from the first episode in the book, or the first character in the book, Melanie, to Hannah, who is a pastor's wife, and then there is Jay, who is you, and each one represents a different type of person. At the same time, there's similar threads throughout each one, because particularly these three, and these aren't the only three in the book, by the way. Grief plays a role in each of these characters. Talk something about that.
With grief, it's a loss of control. So you've lost someone that's dear to you, but you had no control in that. It's a loss you can't get back. You lose your keys, you can find them. But you lose a loved one that's permanent. And then you're not prepared for that. And then there you are in this spiral when your support system is no longer there. And so now you're having to assimilate, or you get a pseudo support system, somebody else or something else, drugs, another person, some kind of habit, some kind of addiction comes in to take that place.
And Melanie, for instance, was raised right, had a loving father who prepared who provided for the family, even prepared for them when he would pass on. So and Hannah lost her mother. Melanie's death, which Melanie's father's death, which was interesting to me, not only impacted her and led her into an episode of domestic violence, but even her mother. And so that was kind of surprising. All of these are ostensibly middle class, young black women, I assume, whose lives were changed drastically because of the loss of someone close to them.
Right. And it's and even in my situation, when my mother passed, I was 22. I was grown, according to standards, and she had prepared me for life, but there was such a void. I mean, this huge place like the Grand Canyon in the middle of your heart, and how do you fill that up? So you start putting stuff in that place to see if it can.
And not careful about who you put in that place. So as you and it's those types of domestic violence incidents in which people are vulnerable, then they start grasping at straws and trying to fill that void, trying to get comfort when they haven't resolved it. One of the things that kind of comes to mind to me is how important it is for people who are going through episodes of grief, because I've experienced it as well, to get some level of counseling when you're going through.
Yes, and the common thing I think with all of the women, 11 women, including myself in this book, is that there was no counseling. Yeah, it's huge. And I encourage that. I preach that. Because, especially in African American communities, you can pray everything away. And if you can't pray it away, something wrong with your faith. Or if you have to go to counseling and then you're weak. We have this strong black woman stereotype going on, in that if there is any chink in your arm, or if your if your cape have any wrinkles in
Right.
it, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
So it's a sign, we consider it a sign of weakness when you have to go outside of your norm to get some advice on how to deal with your problems.
Right.
You should be able to go to your pastor, you should be able to talk to somebody in your family, and of course you're going to pray it away.
Right.
And then you should be fine. You get over it.
Yep.
We got stuff to do. Keep moving.
Yep.
And it's not that simple.
I know when our son died, our first son died. He was 11 years old. We were at the church then. He died of what was then for us a mysterious disease, and we were. He was living because we knew she could take care of her best. My mother-in-law, and so there was guilt associated with all that, and then the challenge of the guilt of not being able to find a cure for it, all that kind of stuff. And I know my wife particularly, of course, had a hard time with it, and she literally had people at church telling her after a few months, "Well, get over it. You can have another child," and all that. And it's unthoughtful attempts at comfort like that can lead people into a whole lot of dangerous places.
It's best to just be quiet.
Exactly.
And have a ministry of presence.
Exactly.
People don't always want your advice. They just want you to just sit there and be present.
Yeah, exactly.
And when you decide to move, then you move. Grief is no time frame on it. It's no, in 2 weeks or in a month or whatever. I remember my mother passed. It took me 2 years to drive past the hospital where she died in.
Right.
I would purposely reroute myself to make sure I didn't see the window of her room that she died in. I couldn't handle it. And then I winded up, when I went to nursing school, I was assigned to that hospital. So I went up to that room, and me and that room had a good talk.
Hi everyone, this is Takisa Jackson, Community Health Worker with Community Health and Wellness at City Square. You're listening to Reverend Gerald Britt interview one of City Square's most seasoned poverty fighters, J.R. Newton. Poverty has a direct impact on the health of our community. As the cost of healthcare skyrockets, those with the least among us feel the greatest impact. The expenses associated with medical appointments, prescriptions, transportation, and time off from work are simply too much for our neighbors living in poverty. Yet, when neighbors go without care, their health expenses don't just disappear. Rather, those expenses do two things. They shift and they increase. They shift to family members and friends who must take on additional responsibilities, missing work, and ultimately neglecting their own health in order to care for another. They also shift to the community where they balloon into astronomical emergency room fees and treatments for serious medical conditions that could have easily been avoided with much less expensive preventative care. The community ends up paying the tab through higher insurance premiums and increased fees for routine care, cutting off access for even more people and thus starting the cycle anew. City Square's many health initiatives aim to improve access to care for our neighbors, while also easing the burden a lack of access puts on the rest of our system. The work of our health programs is based at our community clinic in South Dallas, where a team of healthcare professionals provide the local community with a patient-centered medical home. Our clinicians also meet our neighbors in the community, providing services at locations across Dallas, including the cottages at Hickory Crossing, City Walk at Ackerd, and our destination home sites. We are operating and developing many more health initiatives here at City Square, and you can help. Please visit citysquare.org/volunteer to find out about opportunities to get involved with our work, or consider making a donation at citysquare.org/give. A reoccurring monthly gift of just $50 covers the cost of office visits and lab fees for 35 uninsured patients at City Square Community Clinic. When you consider how expensive healthcare is, that is a hard investment to beat, and it's one you won't find anywhere else in our community. Please take a moment today to visit citysquare.org or give us a call at 214-303-2120.
Gerald Britt, Vice President of External Affairs for City Square. This is our Urban Engagement podcast, and we are talking to J.R. Newton, who has a long and varied academic career and pursuits and has written a book, Healing Voices. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. We're going to talk about her work at City Square and find out how important all of this is related to poverty. Let me just also stop and say something about because it's come to light recently about even violence in the domestic violence in the transgender community, which has come to light with Malaysia Booker and others who have unfortunately been murdered.
Right.
But the idea that we have so objectified a class of people that even when we see them being abused publicly, we can stand around and kind of look at it almost as if it's entertainment versus interjecting ourselves in that situation and coming to their rescue.
Right. Well, I think when we see things like that happen, and we don't understand the reason, or we don't understand the madness behind it.
Right.
We should pass over all of that and see the humanity of it.
Exactly.
That regardless of that person's identity,
Right.
that there is a human aspect there.
Right.
And human life is valuable.
Right.
But when you feel devalued your own self, and when you're struggling with your own identity as a valued human,
Right.
then another human's life, doesn't have as much value because you don't even value your own life.
Exactly.
So when you got some self-hatred going on, then it's kind of easy to just overlook hatred toward another group.
And I think that's a very good point, because you're looking at, in certain situations, perhaps that situation in which Malaysia Booker was first beaten, a whole community of people who are experiencing that devaluing that you're talking about.
Right.
And so it's not a fact that it's not an idea of them not wanting to be human.
Right.
Or having a more human or humane response. It's the fact that they themselves don't feel worthy.
Right, exactly. So it's portrayed on to someone else or something else. If I can make somebody else feel worse than I do,
Right.
They can suffer more than I can.
Right.
Then that's good, and that's sad. That's sad commentary.
Right. A lot of people do not make the connection between domestic violence and poverty. There's always the why don't they get out of it situation? Why don't you just leave? Why is it that you stay? A lot of women, and it's taken me a long time to even sympathize with that, let alone see it. But a lot of women feel as if they have no choice because this is their economic support you're talking about.
Right. There's a huge connection between domestic violence and poverty. It's huge. You would be surprised at the number of women that are homeless, that are living on the streets, that are in shelters, that are disconnected simply because they've been in those situations, and they now, they may not have an education to be able to get another job. They may not have a family support system that will support them. And it looks like, when you look at the statistics, it looks like a lot of brown and black women are the ones that are experiencing this and, may already be in an impoverished situation, but that's not the case.
Right.
More affluent women, if they have a domestic dispute in their homes, they can call the country club.
Right.
They can go to an exclusive resort.
Right.
They can have a little vacation,
Right.
With their therapist,
Right.
They can get away and they never come up on the radar.
Right.
But when you're poor and you don't have resources, then you're going to go to the shelter.
Right.
Then you're going to go to community resources to get help, and then you are counted.
Right.
So it looks like brown and black women, minority women are more affected, and they're not.
Right.
It's just they're being counted.
Right.
This thing goes across the board. There is no data that shows that affluent women are less affected than minority women or poor women.
And even educated women.
It doesn't matter.
Right.
It does, and I felt like, you got a degree and you enduring this. What's wrong with you? You should be. I even had a woman told me after she read my story. She said, "I thought you were smarter than that."
Yeah, I did too.
And I said, "You know what? I did too." I said, education and good sense don't always go together.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you can't equate it to that. No, educated women are really vulnerable.
And it is more affluent communities don't necessarily call 911.
No.
And
they call their lawyers.
Yeah, exactly. And I've told people for a long time that the difference between mental health issues in more affluent communities and mental health issues in Black communities, the difference between the two of them is insurance.
Amen on the insurance. Yeah, because you're able to, you have that resource where you can go to private sessions.
Right.
We have to seek out free or low cost resources, and so we don't do it.
Right.
Because we can't afford it.
Right.
But I encourage everyone, male or female, every year go get your mental checkup.
Yeah.
You go get your physical checkup. You get your heart checked out, your liver and all of that. And you never think to go get your mind straight.
Right.
I had it suggested by a colleague. She had went to see her psychologist. She said, "Well, I went for my yearly mental checkup." Is a Caucasian female. And I was like, she said, "You should go get yours too." And I'm like, "Are you trying to tell me something?" And so she said, "No, we go and get our physical checkup. We do all of the mammograms, all this stuff, but we never think to go get our mental checkup to make sure that we're dealing with stuff correctly." So I took her up on it. I called the therapist. I've been going to her for the last 15 years.
Wow.
Every year I go make sure my cheese is still on my cracker. I go in and, I don't know her from Adam. We sit and we talk for an hour and she gives some suggestions as, you deal with this, okay, maybe you should try this. And we're good.
But it makes sense because stuff happens all year long. Stuff happens.
Every year something goes down. Yeah. And we may or may not be dealing with it in a healthy way.
I had Johnny Ray Youngblood, who's pastor of St. Paul Baptist Church in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. He was at my church for a series of meetings. And he told me one time, I didn't take him as seriously as I should have, but he told me, he said, "Britt, every preacher needs a good analyst." And I started thinking about some of the stuff that I was going through just that week. And you're right, because you're not just going through, be it as a preacher, be it as a nonprofit executive, or any of our professions. You're not just going through that stuff. You're going through stuff at home. You're going through stuff in the community. You're going through stuff. And if you can't deal with it correctly, the bleed over effect of it is what happens when you're at home or when you're at work. At some point, it's going to bleed. I used to believe in compartmentalization. Stuff doesn't stay compartmentalized.
No, not when it comes to mental health. Yeah. Every pastor needs a pastor.
Yeah.
When you have a pastor that don't have a pastor, then things can go awry. You should be able to have an accountability pastor that will put your feet to the fire and say, "Hey, you're not dealing with that right."
Yeah.
Or, let's get you some help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now, which kind of brings us to some conversations about your work here at City Square. So you are your official title is community health nurse.
Unofficial.
But that's kind of some of us have catch-all terms in our titles. Yeah. That's kind of catch-all for you. For instance, you interviewed some of, if not most of, the first residents for the cottages. And for those of you who don't know, the cottages is our tiny home project, which is right across the street from our Opportunity Center, 1610 South Malcolm X Boulevard. I ran into you a little while you were doing some of those interviews. Talk about the mental health issues associated with our homeless population. And not just mental health, but health issues as well.
Right. Well, one of the qualifications for people people to be housed in those cottages was that they had to have an Axis 1 mental health diagnosis, which means depression, bipolar disorder, or schizophrenia. Some of them have all three. And then if they have a drug addiction problem, then they're dual diagnosis, which means they have a drug addiction and a mental problem.
Right.
And I interviewed all of them and some.
You did a health checkup after that.
Yeah, it was yes. And then along with that, if you are not mentally stable, then your physical health is not on the radar. Or if you're drug addicted, your physical health is not on the radar. You're dealing with some other issues. You're trying to make sure you get your drugs.
Right.
Even in the midst of your blood pressure being too high, you have cancer, you know stuff, you've got broken bones. All of them seem to be hit by cars. I don't know what that was. Everybody been in a car wreck. But anyway, I thought that was strange. But just all of those, when you're, even yourself that may not have a mental health diagnosis, when you're depressed or you're down or you're worried about something, you're not worried about, did I take my medicine this morning? That's not on the radar. You're trying to deal with that problem at that moment. But when you have a mental health issue, that problem at that moment can go on for months.
This is Gerald Britt, Vice President of External Affairs for City Square. We're talking with J.R. Newton, who is the catch-all term for our title here at City Square is community health nurse, but she does a lot more than just be a nurse. She's a registered nurse. She is a minister. She is a nonprofit. She's a domestic violence abuse, anti-domestic violence abuse advocate. And we're talking about the fact that when we open the cottages, which is across the street from our Opportunity Center, she screened the first few residents or at least candidates for residency in the cottages. You were talking about the mental health side. I think a lot of people don't take into account the stress, the physical stress, physical and emotional and psychological stress that life on the streets causes our neighbors.
Mm-hmm. It is. You get into. I've noticed that they get into most of them get into a mindset of they think life differently. Mm-hmm. They cope differently. Things that we would think would be, just bizarre is very normal. Right. To that group on the street. Our neighbors are really. I've seen them be housed in the cottages. Come in. They're so glad they have a new home, a new start, or whatever. But they bring the same behavior with them. Right. And so whatever they were doing on the street to survive, they think they have to do that too while they're being housed. Right. Or if they have a drug addiction, now's the time for you now to go to rehab. Get off of drugs. Start getting some. But they still continue that same pattern. Right. And just getting at the root of why some of them will change and go ahead and go a different direction, right. And some of them will stay in that same vein. I don't know how I don't know the answer to that. Right. It's very individual. We've seen some come in and say, you know what, I'm tired of that. I'm tired of that life. It's not going anywhere. And they totally go get a job. They get, and they move on. Right. And then you have some that this is the way I live, and I'm going to always be like that.
I've seen it at Destination Home. I supervised that program for the first few years there. And I remember when we opened Destination Home, we had the first 2 or 3 residents there. One of whom stayed overnight and left because he just couldn't handle being inside. There was another one who he lived, stuff was wrong with apartments, but he wouldn't go to the landlord and complain. He wouldn't go to the office and complain. And I asked him, why didn't you do it? He said, I just don't want to cause any trouble. I just don't want to be in trouble with anybody. I don't want nobody to take this apartment away from me. And I did explain, you are a tenant. You're paying rent here. If your lights aren't working or your water's not running, you've got the right to complain. And then even getting back to the issue of grief, I was sitting, we had a Thanksgiving dinner and sat with 2 or 3 of them. And so I asked them, I said, so what finally got you on the streets? And to a man, all of them said it was an episode of grief. They lost a mother, they lost a daughter, they lost a friend, but it was a loss that got them on the street. It was a death, the grief associated with that death, then alcoholism, then drugs, then homelessness, almost to a man.
Yeah, almost all of the men, especially when I interviewed them for the cottages, I asked, just out of my own curiosity, I asked why, what led to you being homeless? And I know 98% of them said, I lost my mother. Yeah. I lost my mother. They lost that main support system. Right. And then that just started to spiral. But that's exactly it. Yeah. And not knowing how to deal with it.
Exactly.
And not reaching out for help, or even knowing it is help, or that you need help.
Or that you need help, which I think gets back to that need for mental health services that we so desperately claim that we don't need in our community.
That system is so broke. Oh my gosh. Yeah. That system is very broken.
How do you get back on track with this? Because we're seeing, or I'm hearing that for nowadays, children as early as 1st and 2nd grade are manifesting mental health issues, lashing out in school, being disruptive, not just. I was visiting a friend of mine who's a principal in the school district, and they brought a little kid in there who couldn't have been more than the 2nd grade, and he was just screaming to beat the band, just going off. Nobody could. If you tried to approach him, he'd kick at you, or he'd pull away from you and start screaming. How do we begin to kind of recalibrate our thinking and more importantly, the importance of dealing with mental health in our families?
I think we're seeing, I think it's a combination. It's JR 101. Don't quote me on it. And it ain't documented nowhere. But I think parenting styles have differed. I think there's a difference in how, we deal with children that, like old school way, that would never happen. Right. Yeah. You and I growing up, we know how that would be fixed. Right. We just take you aside and have that talk. Right. And we straight, okay? Right. But nowadays there's a different style of parenting. A lot of times kids are being labeled as being as having mental illness when it's really just a discipline problem. Right. And it's not being carried out at home. People, I was listening to a woman, she was complaining because the school uniforms that the school gave her child didn't fit, and she was having trouble getting them to return and get the correct size. So I'm saying to myself, now the school system feeds your child breakfast, they feed your child lunch, and if you stay late, they feed your child after school. If on the weekends, in the summer, they feeding your kids. They give your kids free school supplies. They give your kids free uniforms, shoes. When do you parent? Just big question. That's just a question.
Surely you can
from the back of the room. Like, at what point do you take the responsibility of parenting? Right. I didn't have that option. I did it all. Right. Food, all of that. Right. So there's such a. And I'm not saying that some people do not need all of those things. Right. But then I think sometimes people take advantage of those things instead of taking responsibility of parenting. You got to spend time with your kids. I'm sorry. Right. I know they work your nerves, right. They all of that. They're supposed to. Right. But I think there's a parental responsibility. For kids that do have mental health issues, I think sometimes the system is so flawed. The mental health system is if you don't have this kind of insurance, you don't have Medicaid, you don't have, if you don't have those insurance things in place, they just fall through the cracks,
right.
And kids are suffering unnecessarily, so I don't know what the answer to that is. I think one component is parents get back to parenting.
Well, I think you're right. I think it has to be a range of answers. We're so used to looking for silver bullets,
right,
and something that can address almost every situation across the board. And I tell there ain't no such animal. At the one time, you understand that people need certain supports in order to be able to make it. But that does not absolve you of the responsibility of utilizing your resources and whatever skills you have to not only take advantage of those resources, but to kind of do what they're there to help you climb up so where you can see a point where you can do better.
Right. I was reading an article that was saying that people born in poverty that try to go to school and try to, better themselves. It takes you 20 years to turn that boat around in the bathtub.
Right.
That's a big struggle to try to come from nothing to get to a point where you're not considered in the poverty level.
Right.
I remember when I first went to college, I was raised by my mom, and we went to fill out the paperwork, and they did the income thing. I just want to go to school. I'm like, I had a daughter. I'm not, I don't know all the hoops you jump through. Just send me to school.
Right.
And they told me that we were below the poverty guideline. And I looked at my mom. I said, "Who's in poverty?" She said, "We are." I said, "How long? When do we get to be in poverty?" She said, "You've been in poverty all your life." I'm like, "What?" I had a nice, clean place to stay. I had beautiful clothes. My mom made all my clothes.
Right.
I had a good support system. I had a house. I didn't see where the poverty was.
Right.
Your parents worked so hard to keep that from you.
Right.
And I was safe. I didn't see where. So we think poverty can be financial, but it can also be some spiritual and some emotional poverty.
Exactly.
And that's what really crushes you.
Yeah.
So from that point on, they explained to me that because I had a child at 17 and I was unwed, that
you were more poor.
There was an 80% chance that I wouldn't make it. That I wouldn't finish high school, I wouldn't finish college. My kids definitely would not finish high school, and they definitely wouldn't go into college. So, I ain't no mathematician, but I'm like, so what's this 20% doing? I said, how about I join the 20%? I don't know about the 80, but I'm going with the 20.
Yeah.
So I'm always on that 20%, hey, there's somebody out there that made it work. So I decided, as a young person, that, I made some mistakes, but this was not going to be, I'm not going to let my mistakes punish the next generation. So I'm going to get an education. They're going to get an education. We're going to turn this thing around. I also decided I was going to turn that unwed pregnancy thing around. Mm-hmm. I told them, I said, look, we're not going to have no kids floating around. I don't want to have to go to the moon and find my grandchildren. Find you somebody, marry them, make babies, do this thing right. Don't fall into my traps. You don't have to suffer what I suffered. So when my oldest son got married this year, and my youngest son got married 3 years ago, and my daughter, she and her husband have been married about 20-some years. Mm. And I was sitting out just thanking God, and God said the curse is broken.
Right.
I heard it just as clear. I said, the curse is broken. He said, remember when you asked me that this is what you wanted for your family, that everybody goes to school, everybody gets an education, that everybody gets married, have their own family. He said, I did what you asked me to do. The curse is broken.
That's something.
I shouted.
Yeah.
I shouted. I still shouting because at that moment, I've answered that prayer.
Hey everyone, this is Shannon from City Square Track. Youth leaving the foster care system are unprepared for independent living and face significant challenges and barriers as they transition out of state care when they turn 18. 98% have a monthly income of less than $1,000. Half have experienced homelessness, and more than half are unemployed. Nearly a third are already parents. Through intensive case management and life coaching, City Square's Transition Resource Action Center provides youth ages 16 to 24 with a path to self-sufficiency and success. Wherever our young neighbors experience a need, whether it's food, education, housing, resume building, job training, financial coaching, or physical and behavioral health resources, TRAC is there to serve North Texas foster youth across 17 counties. City Square's programs are known, not just in our city, but across the country, for being the most innovative and effective at fighting poverty. TRAC is no exception. If you know foster youth searching for resources as they transition from state care into adulthood, be sure to let them know about City Square TRAC. They can find our location and contact information at citysquare.org/track. That's citysquare.org/TRAC. They can also reach us by calling 214-370-9300. If you'd like to get involved, visit citysquare.org/volunteer for more information. Thank you so much for listening. Now, back to the podcast.
Talk about, where you were when you were entering college and whatnot, because I think this is important to understand. You were going through episodic domestic violence while you were getting your education and while you were getting your first job and while you were becoming a registered nurse. All that. How did you do that? Because not everybody has that type of wherewithal.
I think it
because that takes a great deal of courage. It takes a great deal of strength. It takes a great deal of spiritual awareness and initiative.
I was raised by some strong, crazy black women. I'm just going to tell you. With no men around. I don't know if they had buried them in the backyard or what. But, I was just taught to be independent. And that, somebody may come along, but my mother said, always make sure you got your own bank account, your own money. So if somebody run off, don't let nobody stay with you. None of that. Right. It's some things you don't want to do in front of your kids that one day you'll tell them not to do and they'll look at you and say you did it. Right. So all of that's in your mind. Right. All of that's in your upbringing. And, just a low tolerance for craziness. Right. So when it got crazy, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to have to move on. But then I had to get to a point when I got divorced this last time. I've been married twice. And my first husband died, and then I divorced the second husband because of the violence. And I felt like I had wasted 3 years of my life fooling with this foolishness. I said, this is dumb. This is just dumb. Because, when I'm running for my life, I'm going to the shelter, and the shelter made me sit there and watch this dumb film. I said, this is just, I'm sitting there in somebody else's underwear. I got a house full of clothes in my house. I got furniture at my house, but I'm leaving my house. All right. And the statistics said on that film, there's a 95% chance that your boys will become violent men toward their wives if they stay in this situation. And they were young then. I said, that's it. I can't do it. I cannot. I would just die if I knew that my sons treated their wives or their girlfriends like I've been treated. And that's what pushed me. I got to get out. I cannot, for the next generation, I cannot ruin my boys' chance to have a decent life because of that. And that's what pushed me.
And it's equally as interesting, the three figures that we saw in your book, Hannah and Melanie and you. All of you had those moments where you said enough, and a couple of you said enough a couple of times, but you had one enough that was emphatic. And is that where women have to get, and men who are suffering from domestic violence?
I think it gets to that. Like sometimes we go back And I went back. I went back several times because I'm listening to this rhetoric. Well, I'm sorry. I won't do this again. Here come the flowers and the roses, and here comes all of this stuff that you want as a woman you want that to be your norm. But that's just bait. And then, because if he did it once, he'll do it again, And then you go back, you thinking everything's cool, and then we start with this again. So at some point, you have to say, that's a lie, and I'm not listening to it anymore. But sometimes we get filled maybe to eye level, and then we'll get filled to above the eyebrow. But when we get filled to the top, right, it's out. Yep. It's nobody, no thing, no one, nothing can make you go back. So it's individual. Some people, I stayed in it 3 years and that was it for me. Some people stayed in it 14 years. Right. Some people 20 years. I don't know where your enough is. Right. But just hope that you can get out alive, before before you get that enough.
Yeah, I used to, when I was counsel couples, I would always tell them, I said, till death do you part does not mean until he kills you.
Exactly. Exactly. I have heard so many women, every time I do a book signing, some woman walks up to me and say, I went through this, I went to my pastor, and he questioned me as to whether I was doing my wifely duties, whatever that was, and if I was a good housekeeper. And if I was a good cook, he's questioning her credentials, right, against this man's violence, and go back and see if you can do better. Right. Not talking to him, right, talking to her. Right. So there have been pastors that have sent women back into the fire.
Oh yeah.
And that's why, I think that's my passion for life, is to educate pastors on how to not do that. Right. How to, and sometimes you got to preach to the predator, and the victim, right, because he's sitting right next to her in church.
So let's I know this is a rather freewheeling conversation.
This is fun.
But I tell you wasn't going to hurt. But I do want to get to some other aspects of both your life and your ministry and your work. So let's talk a little bit about Tapestry. What is that about?
Tapestry Ministries is a nonprofit that I started back in 2009. The YES program, which is Youth Expecting Success, it's been going, this year it celebrated 20 years. Okay. So, I kind of did it at different churches, different locations, and we do SAT prep, we do life skill classes like spiritual growth, sex education, money management, career development. We do all of those things to kind of help give these kids a hand up, so when they get in these situations out in life, they know how to deal with them. And I did that out of my own passion of just, I knew I wasn't prepared. That if somebody had told me about sex education, I could have made some different choices, because I didn't know. So eventually I established Tapestry Ministries and put the YES program under that. And then the Tapestry Women's Ministry, which is the domestic violence portion. The book came out of that, and then we also try to do emergency sheltering for women that are trying to get into the shelters, but the shelters are always full mostly. Mm-hmm. And so we house them until we can get them into housing or get them into the shelter. The idea is that you don't want them to go back, right, just because there's not a bed for them in the shelter. Right. So that's kind of how that Tapestry is rolling out.
And the YES program for youth, I think it's really important because it's in Dallas, of course. DISD has recently received all types of kudos, mm-hmm, for its success in turning around, quote unquote, education. I think it's important for everybody to understand, yes, DISD has made progress, mm-hmm, but that progress isn't being felt by every student in DISD at this point.
And that's my dream one day, that we can get this program into schools as an elective, mm-hmm, because we have, about maybe 40 kids that have, in the last 20 years, that have been through our program. that have graduated from colleges all over the country.
Mm-hmm.
And we have about that many more in colleges and universities across the country now. And most of those, I'd say 95% of them were first generation.
Mm-hmm.
And we've done that with no money. What could we do with some funds?
Yeah. I tell people coming to me wanting to start a nonprofit, I say you need to figure out how to make this work with no money first.
Hey, when I first started it started out as a sex education forum because the youth at the church we were at Central Dallas Church, and these kids were coming in with all kind of behavior. I said, they're going to wind up like me. Mm. I saw myself. Mm. So sometimes your greatest ministry comes out of your greatest tragedy.
Right.
The thing that you thought would break you,
right.
Is the thing that you now see as you can do to help someone else. So I said, what can I do to stop these kids from being another me?
Right.
So we did the sex education forum, and I was asking parents, if I did sex education classes, would your kids come? They say, when, where, we'll bring the food. Please, say something. So we had like 40 kids turn out, girls and boys, and we took the boys. The men took the boys, we took the girls, and some stuff came out of there. So after that, I said, I think we on to something. So the next year, we did it formally as a program just for girls. We took 7 girls. And out of those 7 girls, one of them is on the board now. She finished from Baylor. She was homeless. I had one that was in foster care. She's got her master's. Just out of their first class. And so we incorporated the boys, and then, we just kind of grew from there. But I went to department stores. I was begging something. I went to grocery stores. I went everywhere because I saw a program at another big church, and that debutante program was costing those kids like $2,000 a piece. Right. I said, these kids are just as deserving. How can I give them that same experience? Right. So I went to begging. So now we have sponsors that sponsor their gowns for graduation. We buy the boys their first suit because I feel it's important. We call it the Elijah Cloak Program, named after my dad, because he used to say, every boy needs a suit. Yeah. You never know what's going to happen. Yeah. So we have men that donate to make sure these boys have their first suit. Mm. So it's that's kind of how it keeps growing. And after 20 years, I was like, whew, all right. And then some little kid will walk up to you and go, Miss J.R., I want to be in your program next year. I'm like, oh, Lord. Okay, baby. Ooh, okay. But, I mean, that's the meaning behind it. I don't want another me out there.
I don't think that'd be too bad, actually.
Well, it ain't easy.
Gerald Britt, Vice President of External Affairs for City Square. We're talking to J.R. Newton, who is on top of everything we talked about. She actually is an employee at City Square. She actually works here.
I got a job.
She's got a real job. And this is your second swim through City Square. Yeah. I know when I got here 15 years ago, you were here. And then you left, and then you came back. So what was it like when you first got here, and how's it different now?
Well, when I first got here, I think it was about 20 people in a circle. That was it. Me and Larry and a few faithful, we were sitting in a circle. That was staff meeting. We literally could sit in a circle. And now, oh my God, the room is full. They got all of these different programs, and it's amazing. But a lot of work got done with that 25.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of work.
So now, what did you do when you first got here?
I was, Larry approached me about being the parish nurse for City Square, because parish nursing was just starting up, but it wasn't a program in Texas. Right. So they sent me to Detroit in January. You know that's wrong. I should have known then.
Should have known what kind of party it was.
Yeah. So I went to Detroit in January, but that was a life-changing experience. When because in that training, I was challenged to face my own reality. You know, who I really was, who I thought I was different from who I really was.
Now, what do you mean by
You think, well, I'm successful in this area and I got this going on, that going on, but on the inside you're so broken.
Right.
Just so broken. So it exposed all my broken areas, all the grief that I had not reconciled, all the anger I hadn't reconciled. I mean, that training was intense. It broke me down. It broke a sister down. But I'm so grateful for it, because it really, just kind of took the blinders off and just peel back some layers and let me see who I really was, and that I was not what God wanted me to be. And it's a difference in saying, I love you, Lord,
right,
and living, I love you, Lord.
Right.
So it was at that point I just had to lay it all down. I said, God, you've been so good. Whatever you asked me to do, I will do. What you asked me to say, I'll say. Where you tell me to go, I'll go. I'm not arguing with you. There's no dispute. Just tell me what I need to do. And at that point is when I just laid it all down. And I knew that was my calling, to be able to integrate my faith and my career as a nurse into one entity. And so that kind of started my journey.
And then when you came back
this time?
Yeah.
Well, I just gotten out of seminary, and that was another break you down moment. Woo, seminary will take you deeper. And I've been a minister since forever, but I think officially in 2005, Pastor Butler licensed me, but he challenged me. He said, JR, you are a really good preacher. You're a good minister, but I want you to be a great preacher and a great minister. I think you should go to seminary. I'm like, I am old as dirt. Go to seminary. I don't have no student loan debt. He said, I think you will see the difference. So I said, okay, I'm going to take you up on that.
Mm-hmm.
So I went. I was in my 50s. I said, man, this is dumb. This is crazy. You starting all over. But the Lord said, you said, wherever I tell you to go. And I went. And in that seminary process, man, here's another break. I mean, this open heart surgery that God does is rough.
It's not for
the faint of heart.
Yeah,
because when that first week, I called Pastor Button. I said, do you know some stuff they saying about God and Jesus? This is not right. He said, JR, this is not Sunday school.
Right.
You looking for a glorified Sunday school class. This is not what it is. Right. It's you're learning the history, and you're going under and around and beyond. You're going through the scripture.
I've told some people who talked about seminary, and they talk about it not being Christian and all that. And I tell them, I said, look, if you want to go to a Bible study school, you want to go to a Bible school, you go to Bible school. Mm-hmm. If you want to go to seminary and have a critical understanding of scripture and God, that's where you go. Mm-hmm. So seminary is not for everybody.
No, and it is, you have to know who you are. Yeah, you have to have your foundation. And where some people may make the mistake, they're in there, they're going looking for God, right, or they're going to find it. It's not there.
That's right.
You'll get washed out.
That's right.
You have to know what you stand for, why you stand for it, and be able to stand in the midst of all of those different narratives that are coming at you about what you believe, and understand it. I'm standing right here, but I hear you.
Yeah.
But I ain't moving.
And you learn how to incorporate all of that into your faith.
Yes.
But you don't go there looking for faith.
No, you will not. You will not find it.
That's right. That's right. So now, and we're going to wrap this up in just a few minutes, but I want to talk to you just because I see all of this, the work in domestic violence, the work with Tapestry, the work with the work that you do here at City Square, all under the umbrella of your other function around here with regard to health and wellness. Mm-hmm. So talk about that. What is health and wellness versus simply right dieting and exercising and all that? I know it encompasses that, but it's more than that, isn't it?
I see health and wellness in 8 dimensions. A lot of times we just talk about what you eat and it working out. That's just one dimension. That's physical.
Right.
I see it as spiritual health, as mental health, social health, intellectual health, financial health, Let me see, it's 8 of them. Of course, I always forget one of them. But there are 8 different aspects of who we are. And just say in intellectual health. If you didn't know how to read and write, what would your life be like?
Right.
It's going to affect how much money you make, where you work, if you can work.
Right.
All of that's going to be affected. So each dimension, you can't be just one thing.
Right.
And I think our spiritual health is at the center of that. So I kind of look at it like a tent, like a circus tent. It's the pole in the middle.
Right.
If that's wobbly, if that's not stable, if that's shaky, if that's, not where it should be, then every other dimension, is going to be shaky.
Right.
So you have to have that fortified. You got to know who you are spiritually, where you stand. You got to have your understanding with your Creator that in all things, whatever happens, you have something to rely on. And then all of the other things get added in there. So who you are socially, it changes the people that you hang out with.
Right.
That you don't get into those, that you have good relationships with your family. It has to do with whether you have enough income.
Right.
So all of those things are added in. I always do at the beginning of we do a health and wellness class in our Living Well class over at the Opportunity Center. And in that we have exercise, we have nutrition, but we also have different classes on those 8 dimensions of wellness.
Right.
And the one that I start out with is our I give this overview of those 8 dimensions, and I tell a story of this young woman that had all of these issues. That unwed, pregnancy, And I mean, the first time I read it, my daughter was like, "That sound like us." I'm like, "Be quiet." So I put my story out there,
right?
Because it's some really interesting things. So all of those dimensions, I was hurting in all of them,
right?
And so then I asked the audience, what do you think about this young woman? What's her fate? Because she hadn't been getting her prenatal care. She's pregnant again. And, she all messed up. And so one woman said, well, she need to quit having all them babies. People just say, and I just laugh because I'm like, yeah, that's right. And so in the end, I say, that's my story. And they go, oh, I'm so sorry. I said, no. That's a honest commentary.
Right.
You can't hurt my feelings.
Right.
I want you to see that until I got my spiritual self lined up, all that other stuff was all out of order.
Right.
I was hanging out with the wrong people. My money was funny. Everything was jacked up. I couldn't get in school. It was just bad until me and the Lord lined up.
Right.
Then it straightened up. So that's where that's how I see health. That's how I see wholeness. That you can't just be one dimensional of just physical stuff. What else is going on?
Right.
What else is affecting your life? And then work on that. Because we're all unbalanced at one time. Like when I was in school, I was totally intellectual, was way up here, and I wasn't taking care of myself physically. I was suffering. And then once school got out, and, I had to work to try to get myself, so you got to be aware of all of those areas and be vigilant and looking out to see and make sure that all those areas are healthy. Have I spent enough time with my family?
Right.
Am I budgeting my money? You gotta be aware.
Yeah, I tell people balance is something you search for. It's not something you find.
It's intentional.
Yeah.
It's intentional.
Yeah. And I bring that up again because you are health and wellness director around here, so you work with us, not just with our neighbors who are the people that some people call our clients. You don't just work with them; you work with the staff on health and wellness as well.
Yeah, everybody got to get their flu shot, get their TB test. I know it's annoying. But I think it's very, very important that our staff we work and we are engaged in a very, very high stress environment.
Right.
But we do it out of passion and out of love. But be careful that you don't hurt yourself while you're trying to help somebody else. So I think it's very important, that I try to encourage people, take care of yourself.
Right.
Take care of you. Take a break. I'll take me a Friday in a minute.
Have to.
Every now and then you gotta check out and say, look, I gotta go I got to see something new, something different.
Right.
But it's important that we take care of ourselves because, I could tell you on the airplane, you put the oxygen mask on you first before you put it on somebody else.
Right.
You've got to be able to. This is not for the weak.
Yeah.
Because every day you're fighting. You don't know. When I walk across the street to the cottages, I don't know what I'm going to face. I've walked in and it's been all good, and I walked in and, man, I know I don't make it out,
Yeah.
So you just, you pray up. You stay prayed up every day.
So with all that you got going on, with everything you're doing, and not just everything you have done, but everything you are doing, what do you want to do next?
Well, I'll be 65 this year, but that doesn't mean anything. It's just a number. I think my next, this is what I say. Lord may say something different. That's why I take the reign. I say, hey, I work for the Lord and I'm never out of work. I really would like to focus on that piece of educating pastors, educating faith communities on how to deal with domestic violence. I think that is just critical because you have a captive audience.
Right.
And to have a captive audience every Sunday, Sunday after Sunday, Wednesday after Wednesday,
right.
and you never preach a sermon regarding domestic violence?
Right.
That's sad. That's sad. That's sad.
That's right.
I've asked groups of people, when is the last time your pastor has preached about domestic violence?
Right.
And nobody can hold their hand up.
Yeah.
But you got 1 in 3 of the women sitting in your congregation that are affected.
Right.
To me, that's critical.
I've done it maybe 3 times, but that's 3 times in 22 years that I've done it. So it's not easy, and it's something that takes a great deal of study, and you can't go off of what Reverend so-and-so said or whatnot. And there are resources out there that can help you complement Scripture with actual statistics and facts. So I think that's really important.
You got to learn how to reread.
And the self-examination that it takes to be able to preach that with integrity, because you don't want to come off as the hero when you're suffering with challenges on that on your own.
You have to learn how to reread the Scripture.
Yeah.
If Bright didn't teach me anything else, I learned how to reread.
Yeah.
Don't just take it for face value, but get under it. Do your research.
Right.
Do the work.
Right.
Be intentional and find out what it's really saying.
Right.
What really happened to the woman at the well?
Right.
Why was she sitting there?
Right.
It's not superficial. It's an extremely deep story. So I'd like to pursue that. Of course, keep helping these young people not be me, not fall into the traps. Not get into those situations it's too hard. Life is hard anyway, so you don't need it. And you're already 20 paces behind everybody else when you don't have to be if you make good decisions. So I'm really committed to that. So that's kind of where I don't know. I'll be hanging out somewhere.
Well, I know if they end up where you've ended up, they're gonna be in good shape.
Well, I don't want them to take that scenic route that I took. Some valleys and some hills, some of that stuff. You can cut that. I'll cut that learning curve down for you.
Well, we appreciate it, JR. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Reverend Britt. Thank you so much.
And I think this is going to be helpful to everybody who listens to it, because I think that you've just done a stellar job just being a great steward of life. So
thank you. And you too as well. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Hi, everyone. Before we sign off today, here's Gerald Britt with a quick word.
Recently, Dallas's chief of police, Renee Hall, seemed to step in it again. 40 Dallas citizens were murdered in the month of May, and on the eve of the summer months with children out of school, the excessive North Texas heat that tends to make some people particularly surly, as well as our abysmal poverty statistics, Chief Hall sought to explain why the police department hasn't done more to prevent the rise in violent crime. She said, those who have returned from prison who can't find a job, who are not educated, so in those instances have been forced to commit violent crimes. The chief, who has endured seemingly endless criticism almost since her first day on the job, has seen that criticism multiply and intensify. From her inexplicably slow response in firing Amber Geiger, the police officer who shot and killed Botham Jean while sitting alone in his own apartment, saying she mistook that apartment for her own, to an equally inexplicable failure to have a man recorded beating a woman in Deep Ellum parking lot, arrested and appropriately charged, and then days later having the woman arrested for breaking out windows in the man's truck. Chief Hall has been a lightning rod for the ire of some Dallas residents, both officially and on social media. Here may be one area where the criticism is unfair. The chief was not excusing violent crime. In fact, I would imagine if she had the opportunity to give that same interview all over again, she would drop the word violent from the sentence. I also believe she would be careful to point out the fact that Dallas has nearly 700 fewer police officers to protect citizens than it had just 8 years ago, and that because of that, they need all the help citizens can give to reduce crime. But most importantly, let's admit that some violent crime, as well as property-related crime, does have a lot to do with people, some of them uneducated, living in communities of concentrated poverty. Airtight pockets of poverty, to quote Martin Luther King, while lacking opportunity, feeling forced to commit crimes in some cases in order to survive. That's not an excuse. That's a reason, and it's one that we must look at realistically. If you look online at the Texas State Law Library, you will find a staggering number of restrictions on licensing, housing, and employment for former felons. Certain felonies prevent those in the returning prison population from obtaining food stamps or public housing. Does understanding this mean we should be soft on those who commit violent crimes? No. And I don't think any sane person believes that this is what our city's top law enforcement officer was saying. But with 700 fewer police officers, we must see this as a citywide opportunity to be proactive and creative in providing interventions by every institution that touches the lives of those living in our poorest communities. By that I mean mental health institutions, nonprofits, houses of worship, public schools, the community college district, hospitals, as well as city and county government. We all must see ourselves as responsible for bringing to bear our considerable collective and coordinated resources to deal with this challenge. We must realize that this is not a natural disaster. It's a man-made problem that requires an emergency response and calls for an all-hands-on-deck solution. Or we can continue to finger point and blame and wait for the next murder that will cause innocent families to grieve, neighborhoods to live in fear, and the city to shake our heads in dismay, in which case we can all buckle up. It's going to be a very bumpy summer.
Thank you so much for listening to the Urban Engagement Podcast. If you would like to learn more about City Square and the work that we do, please check out our website at citysquare.org. And if you like what you see and would like to join us in the fight against poverty, please consider making a donation. Your gift will have an immediate impact on the lives of our neighbors, relieving them from the desperation of poverty and giving them the necessary tools to succeed. Be sure to tune in next month. Until next time,